Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for an overview of state-level policymaking and the structure of state government here in Virginia. My name is Emily Moore. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the policy analyst at Voices for Virginia's Children. It's important to begin this presentation by sharing with you who we are at Voices and why we do this work. Voices is nonprofit, nonpartisan, and the state's only multi-issue policy and advocacy organization that focuses on issues impacting young people and their families. We prioritize equity and racial justice and bring a healing-centered lens to our policy, advocacy, and research. We are conveners, so we bring communities, organizations, and individuals with lived experience together around common causes, and we use data always to inform the work that we do. Many of the issues that we work on receive bipartisan support in the General Assembly. We specialize in the areas of child welfare, early care and education, healthcare access, economic justice, food access and nutrition security, and youth mental health. Our goal is to raise awareness about the well-being of young people and their families using data and public education, and then championing state laws and funding to improve their lives through advocacy. And we are home to Virginia's Kids Count Data Center, which tracks more than 40 indicators of child well-being by locality, as well as over 150 indicators at the state level. Our data center is made possible through a partnership with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and we're always happy to connect with you if you are ever in need of data for a research project, for any policy analysis that you're doing, or just to understand where your community and locality is in regards to child well-being. So let's jump right into the structure of Virginia's state government and how policymaking happens at the General Assembly. I want to introduce you to some of the key players in our government first. Glenn Youngkin is Virginia's governor and took office in January 2022. His role is to serve as the head of state government and to ensure that state laws are executed. The governor in Virginia is elected to a 4-year term and cannot serve consecutively. The governor has the power to act upon legislation that's being passed by both chambers, the House of Delegates and the Senate, by signing a bill into law, suggesting amendments to legislation, or vetoing any legislation. The governor has the authority to appoint individuals to state boards and commissions and appoint cabinet secretaries and agency heads, such as the commissioner of the Department of Social Services or the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. And the governor proposes a biennial budget every 2 years for consideration to the General Assembly. This is Winsome Sears, and she is our lieutenant governor who also took office in January 2022. The lieutenant governor in Virginia is elected to a 4-year term and also cannot serve consecutively. The role of lieutenant governor is to preside over the Senate and serves as a tiebreaker in the Senate in instances where Senate members may be split on an issue. In Virginia, we have a system of checks and balances where legislation makes its way through 2 chambers, the House of Delegates and the Senate, before it's acted on by the governor. Our next General Assembly session in Virginia will begin on January 11th, 2023, and it will last for 45 days, which is considered a short session. And the goal of this session is to amend the state budget that was approved during last session in 2022. If the work is not completed, then both the governor and the General Assembly, with a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers, can call for a special session to continue the work, which we've seen several times over the last few years during the pandemic. The House of Delegates consists of 100 members. The current split is 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats. Delegates are elected to serve 2-year terms, but they do not have term limits and can be reelected, unlike the governor and the lieutenant governor. The Senate consists of 40 members. The current split is 21 Democrats and 18 Republicans. You'll notice that math actually equals out to 39. And the reason for that is currently there is a special election that will be taking place on January 10th, 2023, to elect the senator for Senate District 7. This district was previously held by Jen Kiggins, who was elected to Congress. And so once that election takes place, we will then be back up to 40 members in the Senate. Senators are also elected to serve 4-year terms, unlike the 2 years served by delegates. And they also do not have term limits and can be reelected. A closely divided House and Senate creates opportunities for bipartisanship, requiring compromise to move issues forward. Majority control also means that the minority party are restricted in what they can do unless a few members in the other party agree. So we are certainly witnessing a closely divided House and Senate and opportunities for bipartisanship in Virginia. Thousands of bills are introduced each year by delegates and senators. Every bill starts out as just an idea. Constituents, advocates, and lobbyists convene with lawmakers to help them know what's important in their communities and in their constituencies, and what issue areas the folks that vote for them are worried about and interested in. Then once those meetings take place to talk about the issue areas and the important areas, a legislator can sponsor or become a patron of a piece of legislation, and then it will get a bill number assigned to it. Once the bills are put forth, much of the work on those bills happen in committees and subcommittees. Every committee considers all legislation that's introduced in its assigned policy area. Subcommittees are then created to consider particular bills and legislation that are really more closely related in issue area, and then they make recommendations to the full committee. Committees hold hearings, they hear testimony from interested parties and stakeholders, they debate proposed legislation, and ultimately vote on whether to kill the bill for moving forward out of committee or to do what's called report out, which is also just to pass the bill along to the full chamber for a vote. The committees that often hear and consider legislation that concern children's issues, such as the issues that we advocate for here at Voices, in the House are courts of justice, education, and health, welfare, and institutions. Those committees in the Senate are courts of justice, education and health, and then rehabilitation and social services. And then any bills that have a fiscal impact are sent to money committees, who typically hold the purse strings of Virginia's finances. And then those two committees are House Appropriations and Senate Finance. Part of the decision-making process is determining where funds will be allocated in the state's 2-year budget, which is called the biennial budget. Virginia's biennial budget is enacted into law in even number years, and then amendments to it take place and are enacted in odd number years. The amount of money in Virginia's budget varies from year to year, but as you can see on this slide, there are billions of dollars that are allocated in the state budget. And the Office of Health and Human Resources has one of the largest budgets out of the state secretariat. And you can see here about $26 billion a year are being allocated over fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 to programs under or agencies under the Office of Health and Human Resources. So those are our agencies like Department of Social Services, Department of Medical Assistance Services, and the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. Those billions of dollars that are ultimately allocated are allocated by a very small amount of legislators. They're called the Conference Committee, and they are ultimately responsible for resolving differences in the budgets that are passed by the House and the Senate, and then finalizing a budget that makes its way to the governor's desk. And this chart gives an overview of the budget process. The process begins with the budget preparation by state agencies. So again, those agencies are like the Department of Social Services, the Department of Education, the Department of Medical Assistance Services. And they analyze their programs and the needs of their programs, and then prepare and submit proposed budgets to the Department of Planning and Budget, which you see abbreviated here as DPB, in the early fall timeframe. The DPB will then analyze the agency budget requests to verify the cost, confirm the needs for services, investigate alternatives for funding, and then ultimately identify policy issues for the governor's consideration. In late fall, the governor and the cabinet secretary, so like the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, work together to prepare a proposed budget that reflects the administration's priorities. The one thing to consider is that the governor's budget will not typically incorporate all of the funding requests submitted by state agencies. So the governor will sift through those state agency requests as well as identify any of the administration priorities and then submit their budget proposal to the General Assembly by December the 20th in the form of what's called a budget bill. And then the governor's office will distribute a document called half sheets, which explain the proposals that are included in the budget bill. Then comes the legislative action phase. So once the governor has submitted their budget proposal, the budget bill that goes to the General Assembly will convene in January to review the governor's budget proposal, propose amendments and other bills to this budget and for state consideration, and begin the legislative process in those committees that I mentioned. Each chamber, the House and the Senate, will pass its own version of the budget bill, which will incorporate budget amendments that were proposed, as well as new bills that were proposed. And then the budget will and the bill will cross over to the other chamber, where it's debated on and voted on. Before the General Assembly adjourns, that conference committee that I mentioned convenes to resolve any differences between the versions passed by the House and the Senate, and they prepare that final budget bill that goes to the governor. At that point, the governor can either sign the budget as it sits, they can make amendments, or they can veto any of the components of it. If the governor vetoes the bill or any items of the bill or makes any amendments to it, the budget bill will then go back to the General Assembly during a reconvened session in the spring, in which they will vote on the amendments and take up any of the vetoes. The budget passed by the General Assembly and enacted into law goes into effect on July 1st in even-numbered years and on the date of passage in odd-numbered years. There are many ways that you can influence state government policymaking and be an advocate for children, youth, and families during this legislative process. Voices works to engage stakeholders, children and youth, and individuals with lived experience in the process of legislative advocacy and as agents in the creation of policy solutions that help them ignite change in their communities. These resources that I have listed here on this slide provide more information on our work at Voices and how you can get involved, as well as state level resources such as the General Assembly website, the Legislative Information System, and the Virginia Public Access Project that can help you to get more familiar with Virginia's General Assembly, the legislative process, and some of the inner workings of our state government. We hope that you will connect with us, follow us on social media, and join our newsletters to identify ways to put your advocacy skills to use and to make sure that children and young people and their families are being prioritized in decision making here in Virginia. Thanks so much for joining us.